nice to meet you. This is Hani Shaaban from Do&Learn channel. In this video, we're going to use audio stories to learn English. As we all know that stories are memorable and they can affect our emotions easily. That's why we still remember the stories that our grandparents used to tell us in the past. Listening to stories help us to be engaged, and once we're engaged, we will be able to remember things much more easily. So why audio stories? Listening to audio stories will make you able to have conversations. Also, it will help you to improve your pronunciation. Through listening to stories, you will practice two important skills, which are listening and reading. In addition to that, you will learn some new vocabulary which are related to everyday language, the language we use in our daily life. But before we start, I have a piece of advice for you. At the very beginning, try to choose a simple short story, a story that you really like. And after that, you can choose according to your level. Okay, now let's start. Here we go. In this video, I've chosen Grace Darling by Tim Vickery, which is one of my favorite stories. It's very easy and simple, by the way. So let me ask you a question at the very beginning. When I say a story, what comes to your mind? Of course, the first thing that comes to your mind is the author. What is the author? The author is a person who wrote the story. Okay, what else? There are three important things about any story, which are the title, the characters, and the places. The title is the name of the story. The characters are the people or persons in the story, and we know what the places mean. So let me ask you what the title of our story today is. Again, Grace Darling. The characters, we have Daniel Donovan and we have Hall as an example of the places. We have Mr. Rob as another character. We have Dundee, another place. And here we have Grace Darling. And we can notice now that Grace Darling is the title of the story and at the same time one of the characters. And by the way, Grace Darling is the name of a girl. So the story is about this girl who is called Grace Darling. Another character is Simon. Now, before we start, I just want to remind you with the meaning of some question words because we're going to use some of them in this video. Okay, let's go. The first one is what. We use what to ask about information about somebody or something. For example, what is your name? My name is Mahmoud. And number two is where. Where asks about a place or a location. For example, when I say, where do you live? You can say, I live in Ismailia. You give me the place or the location. Okay. Number three is why. And why always ask about a reason. So when I ask, why didn't you go to school? You answer, because I was ill. Number four is who, and who asks about the subject or information about a person. For example, when you want to know the person who did something, for example, you say, when I ask who broke the window, you can say Ahmed broke the window. Number five is how, and how ask about a thing or a situation or the means of transport. For example, when I say, how is your meal? You can say it is nice. I ask about the state of the meal. But when I ask about the means of transport, I can say, how do you go to school? You can answer, I go to school by bus. Okay, let's go to number six. How many ask about an amount or a number. For example, when I say how many cars are there, you can say there are 10 cars. Now let's go to chapter 1. And chapter 1, by the way, is divided into 9 parts. First, we listen to each part and then we discuss it together. Okay? So let's start, please. Listen carefully. Okay, let's start.
Grace Darling by Tim Vickery. The Times, London, the 19th of September, 1838. On the afternoon of the 6th of September, the steamship Forfarshire began its journey from Hull to Dundee in Scotland. There were 60 people on the Forfarshire, which was a big, comfortable, modern ship. There was a strong north-east wind that afternoon, but at first no one was afraid.
Okay, as we can see, chapter 1 is called The Forfeiture. And we can see the Times. What is the Times? The Times is a very famous newspaper in England. And I can show you an example. This is Times newspaper, as I said before. And we can now understand that this part is taken from a newspaper. Okay. Okay. So the place is London and the date is 19th September 1838. Okay, let's discuss the meaning of some new words. For example, steamship. What is a steamship? Steamship is a ship that is powered by steam. In the past, most ships used to work by coal. And if you can see from the picture, you can see smoke comes out of the funnel. This is the ships in the past. Okay, what else we have? The word journey. What is the meaning of journey? Journey means to travel from one place to another. And if you look at this map, you can see our journey from Hull in England to Dundee. So the ship is going to start from Hull and up to Dundee in Scotland. Okay, what else? Wind. Wind means the movement of the air, and it is always very strong. Okay. Now let's go to ask some questions to understand this part. Look carefully, please. Then I ask you. Number one, where did Forfisher start its journey? By the way, we can say start or began because we heard here in the listening began. Began is the same meaning of started. Okay, so the first question is where did the Forfisher start its journey? Okay, that's right. It started its journey from Hull to where? Hull is in England, by the way, to Dundee. Where is Dundee? If you look here in the text, you can see Dundee is in Scotland. So Dundee is in Scotland. Question number three is how many people were there on the Forfisher? The answer is here. If you look here, you can see there were 60 people on the Forfisher. Okay, that's right. Number four is how was the Forfisher? The state. Is it a good ship? Is it an old ship or bad ship or what else? So how was the Forfisher? If you look here, you can see the state of this ship was comfortable, modern ship, which means new ship. So they weren't worried when there was strong wind because the ship is very strong. So they were not afraid. Okay. Now let's go to the second part and I want you to listen carefully because I'm going to ask you some questions again. The first question about this part is who was Daniel Donovan? Look here, please listen carefully.
Daniel Donovan was a passenger on the Forfarshire. He stood on the deck of the ship and looked at the sea. It was difficult to stand on the deck because the wind was so strong. The ship was moving up and down uncomfortably, and Daniel felt ill. Then a big wave hit the side of the ship, and salt water flew into his face.
Okay, but if you look here, you can see a passenger. What is the meaning of a passenger? Passenger is a person or someone who travels on a ship, bus, or a plane. So anyone who travels on a ship or a bus or a plane, we call him or her a passenger. So there's a meaning of passenger. Now, what else? We have this word which is deck. What is a deck? The deck is the floor of the ship. If you look here, it is a ship, and here you can see this is a deck where people can go out of their cabins and sit to enjoy the sea or the sun. This is the deck of the ship. Another word is wave. Wave is how the sea move, the top part of the sea. Because sometimes if there is wind, you can see high wave of the sea. Okay, let's go to our question again. Question number 5. Who was Daniel Donovan? Okay, the answer is he was a passenger on the Forfisher. He was a young man about 30 years old. And of course, this answer is from this text. Another question. What did Daniel Donovan do on the ship? He stood on the deck of the ship and looked at the sea. The answer is here. Stood on the deck of the ship and looked at the sea. Another question. Why was it difficult to stand on the deck of the ship? Now, as you can imagine, that Daniel Donovan is standing on the deck of the ship outside, but it was difficult for him to stand. Why? Because the wind was so strong. The wind was so strong, so he can't stand. And by the way, when you are on a ship and the wind is strong, what happened? What happened to the ship? The ship is moving up and down. So you can't stand. You can't stand well because of this movement. Okay. Another question is why did Daniel feel ill? Why? Because the ship was moving up and down, up and down, up and down uncomfortably. He didn't feel comfortable because of the movement of the ship. Okay, now let's go to another part, and I want you to listen carefully because again you will be asked some questions. So listen carefully, please. And I want you to think about this question while you are listening. So, who was Mr. Rope? Okay, let's start listening.
The wind is getting stronger, said a passenger beside him. He was a tall, dark man with a black coat. Mr. Rob, a churchman. And it's getting darker, too. Yes, said Daniel. I can't see the land now. He looked to the west, but he could see no land, no lights, only water. Big grey waves with white tops, which went up and down, up and down.
Okay, now who was Mr. Rope? I told you before that Daniel Donovan is standing on the deck of the ship, and next to him was Mr. Rope. So Mr. Rope was standing next to Daniel Donovan. And who was Mr. Rope? He was a tall, dark man with a black coat. By the way, there is a slight difference between the listening text and this text, but it doesn't matter because it's not a big difference. So it's okay. Now another question is number 10. Why did Mr. Rob look worried? Why? because he didn't like being at the sea very much. He didn't like the sea. He hates the sea. So when he was on the ship, he looked worried because he doesn't like the sea. Okay. Now, another question is number 11. What could Daniel see when he looked to the west? The answer is here. He looked to the west, but he couldn't see. He could see no land, no lights. So the answer, he could see no land, no lights, only water. He is on the ship. When he looked, he can't see nothing. Only what? Water. There is nothing but water. And this made him feel a little bit worried because he is not feel comfortable. Okay, now let's go to another part. And again I want you to listen carefully. Let's start.
"But the Forfarshire is a good modern ship," said Mr. Rob. "Nothing can happen to a new ship like this. Listen to those fine, strong engines." Daniel looked down at the big paddle wheel on the side of the ship. It went round and round, down under the white water and up again, under the water and up. Then he looked up at the black smoke which came from the Forfarshire's funnel.
Okay, let's discuss the meaning of some new words. For example, the engine. What is an engine? An engine is a machine that makes a ship, a car, anything move. It is the one of the most important part of the ship because it makes the ship moves. Okay. What else? We have what is called paddle wheel. Paddle wheel is a very important part of the ship, by the way. It's a large wheel on the side of the ship that moves through the water. Can you see? This is like wheels. Paddle wheels. It moves like that. The engine makes it move that to make the ship move through water. So this is the paddle wheel. Also, we have funnel. Look, the funnel. It's a pipe on the top of a ship. This is, if you look at this picture, you can see what is a funnel. So, like a pipe on the top of a ship, smoke from the engine comes out of it. This is the funnel. Okay, now let's move to our questions to understand much better. Okay, now Mr. Rope and Daniel Donovan is talking together. They are talking about the state of the ship. Although there is a strong wind, but they are not worried. Why? Because the ship is modern, strong. So they weren't worried. So the question is, why could nothing happen to this or to the Forfisher? Of course, because it was a good modern ship, a new ship. So nothing can happen to it. Okay. Another question is, what did the big paddle wheel on the side of the ship do? Do you remember the paddle wheel, which which makes the ship moves? It helps the ship to move. Okay. So what did the big paddle wheel do? It went around and round because it's a wheel. So it went round and round, down under the water, up and down again. So it went round and round, down under the water, and up again, like that way. Okay, we have another question about this part. What came from the Forfisher funnel? Do you remember the funnel, the pipe on the top of the ship? Okay, what comes? Yes, that's right. Smoke. Black smoke comes off the funnel. And This smoke is a sign that the ship works well. If this smoke stopped, it would be a problem. It means that the ship didn't work well. So, black smoke is a good sign for the ship. Okay. Now, I want you to go to another part, and again, I want you to listen carefully. So, let's start.
Yes, he said. They're good, strong engines. But he was not really sure. He was an engineer, so he knew about engines. Sometimes the Forfarshires' engines made strange noises, and the paddle wheels went round slowly. Then there was a crash, and they went quickly again. Daniel was not happy. A seabird flew low across the white tops of the big grey waves. Daniel watched it and felt wind and rain on his face. Then a door opened behind him, and a woman screamed.
Okay, our question is, what was the job of Daniel? If you look here, the answer is very clear. He was an engineer. What does it mean that he is an engineer? It means that he knows about the engines. Okay, so the answer, he was an engineer. Another question is, why wasn't Daniel sure about the engines of the Forfisher? Don't forget that he is an engineer, and again, an engineer knows well about engines. So why wasn't he was sure when Mr. Rob said they're good, strong engines? Why wasn't he sure about that? Because the Forfisher engines made strange noises. Some noises not not okay, because the engines don't work well because they make noises, and it means it's a bad sign. Remember when we say black smoke is a good sign of a working ship? Now, if the engines make noise, it is not a good sign. So Daniel wasn't sure about that when he heard this noise. Okay. Okay. Another question is, what did Daniel watch? After that, if you can see, he watched what? He watched a seabird flew across the white tops of the waves. A white bird flew, and on the top of the waves. The waves usually is white, and we said before that the waves is the top of the sea, the top water of the sea, and it is usually white. So a bird flew and stopped on these waves. Okay, what did Daniel feel on his face while he was standing? Again, he's still standing on the deck of the ship. So he saw the bird. What else? What he feel on his face? He felt wind, wind, and rain on his face. Okay, and by the way, we have the word screamed, and screamed again, the same meaning of shouted. If you look, the meaning scream means to shout. Okay, I want you now to move to a new part. Do you remember what happened at the end of this part page 4? Then a door opened behind him and a woman screamed. Now, to imagine that Daniel is standing on the deck. Behind him, there is a door. This door was opened, and there is a woman who was screaming or shouting. Okay, why she was screaming or shouting, we're going to know in this part. But I want you to listen carefully, please.
Simon, come back! Come back at once! Daniel looked behind him and saw a small boy. He was running across the deck. He was only 3 or 4 years old, and the wind was much too strong for him. He fell over on the deck and began to cry. Then another big wave hit the side of the ship. The white water came over the side and carried the boy along the deck. "Help!" the woman screamed. "Save my child!" Daniel put out a hand and caught the boy's coat. Then he carried him quickly back to his mother. "Quick! Get back in! Out of the wind, woman!" he shouted. He hurried through the door and closed it with a crash. "It's too dangerous for children out there."
Okay, now I want you to imagine the situation. Now the door behind Daniel is open, and there was a woman screaming, and we knew now why she was screaming, because her child is in danger. So she wanted anyone to help her. So her son, how old was Simon? Simon is her son, is the woman's son. Okay. How old was Simon? Simon, he was 5 years old, and this again the answer is here. He was only 5 years, a little child. Okay. So why did Simon fall on the deck while he was running? Why? Remember that the ship was moving up and down because there was a strong wind. So it was difficult for Daniel to stand, but about a small child, it was very difficult for him, of course. So why did Simon fall on the deck? Because the wind was so strong for him, even for Daniel. Okay. Now I want you to go to another part. Listen, please.
"Yes, I know," the woman said. "Come here, Simon." She sat down and held the boy with one arm. She had another child in her other arm, a little girl, about 1 or 2 years old. "Thank you, sir," she said. The ship moved up and down very quickly, and Daniel sat down beside the woman. She smiled at him, but she looked very white and ill. "I'm Daniel Donovan," he said. "What's your name?" "Mary Dawson," she said. "This is my son Simon, and my daughter Sarah." "Isn't your husband with you?" "No," she said. "He's in Scotland. We're going home to see him. It's good we're in a strong, modern ship." "Yes," said Daniel. Then, for a few seconds, he said nothing. It was quiet in this room, much quieter than outside.
Okay, now Daniel managed to rescue Simon, because Simon, as you know, he fell on the deck, but Daniel could save him. Okay, now he took Simon to his mother, and now they sit inside the cabin together, away from the deck. and Daniel began talking with Simon's mother. They were going to introduce each other, and she introduced her daughter Sarah to him. So how old was Sarah? She was about 7 years, which is still little. Okay, another question. What was the name of Simon's mother? Mary Dawson. Okay, another question. Where were Mary Dawson and her children going? If you look here in the text, you can see the answer. They were going they were going home to see her husband. Where was her husband? Do you remember? Yeah, he was in Scotland. This is the answer here. You can. No, she said he's in Scotland. We're going home to see him. Okay. And now I want you to go to another part. And again, I want to listen carefully and think about this question. What happened to the engines? Okay, let's start.
Mr. Donovan, said Mrs. Dawson suddenly, what's happened to the engines? I can't hear them now. Can you? Daniel listened. My God, he thought. She's right. The engines have stopped. He could hear the noise of the wind and the sea, but not the engines. You're right, Mrs. Dawson, he said. He stood up and ran to the door. Excuse me, But then he opened the door, and his words were lost in the wind. Outside, he looked up at the ship's funnel. There was no smoke above it. He looked over the side of the ship at the big paddle wheels. He watched them for 2 minutes, but they did not move. And all the time, the big grey waves lifted the Forfarshire up and down, and white water blew over the deck.
Okay, now Mrs. Dawson felt something wrong about the engines, so she asked Daniel about what happened to the engines here. Look there to the questions. What happened to the engines? Okay, well, the answer is they have stopped or they have broken down. Okay, and this is answer here when Daniel said, "Listen, she's right." Who's right? Mrs. Dawson. When she said, "What happened?" Because she can't hear the engines anymore. So she asked him, "What happened?" And because she can't hear the engines, she was worried. And when Daniel listened carefully, he he realized that she was right. Okay, now the engines have stopped. What does it mean? It means that they have broken down. Okay, let's go to number 25. What happened to the paddle wheels? You know that the engines make the paddle wheel move, and this helps the ship to go. Okay, now what happened to the paddle wheel? Okay, let's see the answer. It didn't move. It's natural because the engines stopped, so the paddle wheel will stop as well. Okay, another question. What were the sailors trying to do? Now, when the engines stopped working, the sailors thought about another solution. They tried to find another solution like that. They were trying to put up a small sail. What is a sail? A sail helps the ship to go. When the wind hits the sail, it makes the ship go. Okay. Let's go to another part. Listen, please.
"What's happening?" screamed Mr. Rob. "Why aren't we moving?" "The engines have broken down!" shouted Donovan. "This isn't a sailing ship. It can't move without its engines." A big wave hit the side of the paddle wheel and sent white water over their heads. Some sailors were trying to put up a small sail, but the wind blew it out of their hands, away across the sea, into the night. "There are women and children on this ship," shouted Mr. Rob. "It's nearly dark and the weather is getting worse. What can we do?" Daniel looked at him. "I don't know, my friend," he shouted back. "I can't do anything."
Okay, now the engines have stopped, the ship didn't move, and there was a big problem for them. So, why was Mr. Rob worried? Because the engines were broken down and there were women and children on the ship. It's a problem. How can they behave? Okay, what else? We have another question. How was the weather at that time? If you look here, please, and the weather is getting worse. Look, it was getting worse. That's right. Okay, another question. What did Daniel think at that time? How he was feeling? Of course, at that time, he thought that no one can help them because they were in the middle of the sea and it was in the dark. No one can see them. So he thought that no one could help them. Okay, now it is the end of chapter 1. Let me check your understanding by a little quiz, please, which is complete the following sentence. I just want to check your understanding. It's very simple questions. Okay. Now complete the following sentences. One is on the space of 6 September, the steamship Forfisha started its journey from Hull to Dundee. On what? That's right, on the afternoon. So the answer is, is on the afternoon of 6 September, the steamship Forfisha started its journey from Hull to Dundee. Another sentence, there were people on the Forfisha. How many? Do you remember how many people were on the Forfisha? Yes, that's right. There were 60 people on the Forfisha. Okay, number 3. There was a strong northeast east what that afternoon. Okay, that's right. There was a strong northeast wind that afternoon. Okay, another question. The ship was up and down uncomfortably. Do you remember? Yes, that's right. Moving. The ship was moving up and down uncomfortably. Number 5 is the big wave hit the side of the ship and the water flew into his face. And what? The big wave hit the side of the ship and salt water. Why salt water? Because they were on the sea. The water comes from the sea, so it must be salt. Okay. Number 6, the wind is getting what? At that time, the wind is getting stronger. That's right. Number 7, nothing can happen to a new ship like this. Listen to those fine strong. Do you remember? Strong. Yeah, that's right. Strong engines. Nothing can happen to a new ship like this. Listen to those fine strong engines. Okay. Now we have finished chapter 1. All I want from you is try to listen more than once. Then your homework is to record yourself. Try to record the whole chapter by your voice. Then you can send it to our channel